The red icon for Hunter 3 blinked with a fatalistic rhythm on the main screen of the Tactical Operations Center. It was a digital heartbeat counting down its last seconds, trapped deep within the Zagremar Massif, a jagged spine of rock that tore at the sky and shredded satellite signals. 3 green icons, the rest of the SEAL team, were static, their signals extinguished hours ago. The 4th, Hunter 3 Actual, was pinned down in a rocky alcove, his IR signature a lonely smudge of warmth against the cooling stone. Surrounding him, a dozen hostile signatures swarmed like hornets, their positions updated in stuttering bursts as a drone high above played a deadly game of hide and seek with the low cloud ceiling. The audio feed was a nightmare of ricochets and the guttural pops of enemy rifles, punctuated by the strained breathing of the last operator. "Command, this is Hunter 3 Actual." The voice crackled, impossibly calm through the static. "Position compromised. Ammunition critical. I have 3 hostiles visual northeast ridge. More closing from the south wash. Estimate 15 minutes before my position is untenable." Colonel Marcus Vance stood before the screen, arms crossed, his face a mask of grim calculus. He was a man who dealt in percentages, in acceptable losses, and the cold, hard logic of asset management. He saw the blinking red icon not as a man, but as a data point spiraling toward a foregone conclusion. "Air support?" a young lieutenant asked from the comm station, his voice betraying a sliver of hope that Vance had long since learned to suppress. Vance gestured to the topographical display, a 3-dimensional nightmare of intersecting canyons and sheer rock faces. "Look at that," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The ingress route is a box canyon no wider than a city street, with a dogleg turn at the end. The cloud ceiling is at 500 feet. Any asset we send in there is flying blind against rock walls and into a kill box. The hostiles have Zu-23s nested on the ridges. It's a meat grinder." He traced a line on the screen with his finger. "Best case, a pilot gets in. They have no room to maneuver, no angle for a clean weapons release. They'd have to practically scrape their belly on the canyon floor. Worst case, they become another burning wreck at the bottom of that gorge, and we lose a $90 million aircraft and its pilot for a rescue that was already off the table." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like a shroud. This wasn't a tactical problem anymore. It was a eulogy being delivered in advance. The blinking red light was a man, Sergeant Commander Thorne, a decorated operator with a wife and 2 kids back at Coronado. But in this room, under these circumstances, he was an unacceptable risk. "The SEALs knew the stakes," Vance continued, his gaze sweeping over the tense faces in the room. "We cannot compound one loss with another. The official assessment is that close air support is non-viable. It's a suicide mission. We'll maintain ISR oversight, but we are not sending a bird into that coffin." His pronouncement was final. It was logical. It was procedural. In the quiet hum of the TOC, the decision felt both reasonable and monstrous. The blinking red icon continued its steady, desperate pulse, a silent testament to a man being erased by the unassailable logic of command. No one in the room argued. They knew the terrain, they saw the data. The colonel was right. It was impossible. Miles away from the sterile chill of the TOC, the air in Hangar 4 was thick with the smell of hydraulic fluid, jet fuel, and cooled metal. The overhead sodium lights cast a jaundiced glow on the rows of sleeping war machines. Here, the logic of command felt distant, irrelevant. Here, there was only the tangible reality of the aircraft. Major Eva Rostova ran a gloved hand along the leading edge of her F divided by a -18E Super Hornet's wing. Her touch was not one of affection, but of diagnosis. She felt for imperfections, for delamination, for any flaw the ground crew might have missed. Her jet, tail number 207, was an extension of her own senses, and she trusted it only as much as she could personally verify it. She wasn't in the briefing. She didn't need to be. The raw data stream fed directly to the tablet in her flight bag. Topography, enemy positions, weather patterns, the desperate, blinking icon of Hunter 3. While Vance spoke of acceptable losses, Rostova saw only vectors, velocities, and angles of attack. She saw a problem of physics, not philosophy. Her movements were a study in economy, a silent ritual honed over a decade of flying. She didn't speak to the ground crew bustling around her, arming the jet with a specific loadout she'd requested minutes earlier. They knew her reputation. She spoke little, but her requests were precise and always for a reason. 2 GBU-54 laser dams, a brace of APKWS rockets, and a full complement for the 20mm Vulcan. A loadout for surgical work, not saturation. A young airman, barely out of tech school, watched her from a safe distance. He saw the patch on her flight suit's shoulder, a stylized Valkyrie with a lightning bolt in her hand. It was faded, the threads frayed at the edges. He'd heard the stories. They called her Valkyrie not for her bravado, but for the way she appeared over a firefight as if from nowhere, delivered a killing blow, and vanished, leaving only the thunder of her passage. Rostova paused at the nose of the aircraft, near the portside intake. A long, jagged scar ran across a maintenance panel, the metal underneath patched and riveted. It wasn't standard procedure to leave such a visible repair, but she'd insisted. It was a reminder from a mission over the Baca Valley, where a piece of shrapnel from a premature detonation had nearly torn her engine apart. The scar wasn't a flaw, it was a record of survival. It was proof that the machine, like her, could bend to the breaking point and not break. She swung herself up the ladder and settled into the cockpit. The world outside the canopy vanished. This was her true domain. Her hands moved with practiced familiarity over the controls, flipping switches, running diagnostics. The cockpit came alive around her. The twin head-up displays, HUDs, glowing emerald green. She wasn't preparing for a suicide mission. She was preparing for a flight. The enemy, the terrain, the odds, they were simply variables in a complex equation she was built to solve. She sealed her helmet, the hiss of the oxygen system filling the sudden silence. Her own breathing, slow and steady, was the only sound she registered. On her kneeboard, she had a hand-drawn sketch of the canyon's dogleg turn, with wind shear vectors and potential updraft zones marked in red ink. While Vance saw a coffin, she saw a corridor. A very narrow, very dangerous corridor. But a corridor nonetheless. The catapult shot was a controlled explosion, a 4G punch that slammed Rostova back into her seat and hurled 66,000 pounds of steel and ordnance into the bruised pre-dawn sky. The Super Hornet clawed for altitude, its twin F-414 engines screaming in protest as they transitioned from the dead weight of the carrier deck to the fluid medium of the air. Below, the aircraft carrier was a shrinking sliver of light on an ink-black sea. Ahead, there was only the mission. She leveled off at 20,000 feet, a cruising altitude that felt blessedly safe, a temporary reprieve from the task ahead. The jet settled into the familiar, gentle vibration of sustained flight. To her, it was a living thing, communicating through the stick and rudder pedals, through the hum that traveled up the spine of her seat. She flew not by instruments alone, but by feel, a symbiosis of pilot and machine. The ingress route took her over a desolate, moon-like landscape of barren plains that gradually crumbled into a network of arroyos and canyons. The Zagramar Massif rose from the earth like a skeletal hand, its rocky fingers clawing at the low, slate-gray cloud deck. This was the point of no return. Rostova pushed the stick forward, and the Hornet responded instantly, nosing over into a shallow dive. She descended from the relative freedom of the open sky into the oppressive confines of the earth. The world narrowed. The horizon vanished, replaced by the converging lines of stone. Her target was a deep channel carved by some ancient, forgotten river. From above, it was a mere crack in the earth. As she dropped below the canyon rim, the scale of it became terrifyingly real. The rock walls, stained with millennia of mineral deposits, rushed past her canopy. The cloud ceiling pressed down from above, creating a claustrophobic tunnel of gray sky and red rock. The sun was a memory. Her HUD, once displaying the open expanse of the sky, was now a lattice of warnings. Proximity alerts chirped a steady, nervous rhythm. The radar altimeter's numbers scrolled downward with dizzying speed. 800 feet, 600, 400. She leveled out at 300 feet above the canyon floor, her wingtips a scant 50 feet from the jagged walls on either side. Wind sheer, unpredictable and violent, slammed into the aircraft. The Hornet bucked, a wing dipping dangerously toward the right-hand wall. Rostova's response was not thought, but instinct. A microsecond of pressure on the left rudder, a fractional adjustment of the stick. The aircraft stabilized, her inputs so smooth they were almost invisible. In the TOC, they would see only a clean flight path. In the cockpit, she felt every treacherous gust, every pocket of unstable air. She was not merely flying through the canyon. She was reading it, anticipating its lethal whims. The sound was immense. The roar of her engines, with nowhere to go, bounced and echoed between the stone walls. A continuous, deafening wave of thunder that announced her arrival long before she was visible. She was a ghost in a machine of noise, hurtling through a tomb at over 500 knots. On her tactical display, the blinking red icon of Hunter 3 was now less than 10 miles away. It was no longer a data point. It was a destination. What the hell is this? Colonel Vance's voice was sharp, cutting through the low murmur of the TOC. He leaned closer to the main screen, where a new icon, a friendly fighter jet, call sign Valkyrie 207, was moving at impossible speed through the topographical red zone he had declared a no-fly area. Who authorized this launch? The young lieutenant at the comm station swallowed hard. Sir, Major Rostova launched 10 minutes ago. She filed a dynamic flight plan citing imminent loss of friendly life. It didn't require flag-level approval, sir. Vance's jaw tightened. It was a loophole, a pilot's prerogative in an extreme circumstance. It was also a flagrant disregard for his direct assessment. He was about to order her to abort, to turn back before she smeared herself and his aircraft across a canyon wall, when a new voice crackled over the speakers. It was Hunter 3 actual, and for the first time there was something other than grim resolve in his tone. Command, I have... Jesus, I hear a friendly inbound. Low and fast. Sounds like a Hornet. Rostova's world had compressed to the glowing green symbols on her HUD, and the sliver of rock-strewn canyon floor visible beneath them. Her systems were screaming. The Zu-23 anti-aircraft guns nested on the cliffs above had woken up. Red tracer rounds, thick as ropes, began lashing out from the canyon rim, trying to swat her from the sky. They were firing blind, aiming at the sound, but volume of fire had a quality all its own. She ignored them. They were a distraction. Her target was a fortified machine gun nest on the northeast ridge that had Hunter 3 pinned down, the source of the most intense fire. The problem was physics. She was too low, too fast, with no angle for a bomb. The dams were useless here, but the rockets were not. Her thumb moved to the weapons selector. APKWS rockets, laser-guided, precise, designed for this exact kind of work. The target was obscured by a rocky overhang. A direct shot was impossible. Valkyrie on station, she transmitted, her voice a calm, steady presence amidst the chaos. It was the first time she had spoken. Valkyrie, be advised, primary threat is dug in deep under a rock shelf. No direct line of sight. Hunter 3 actual reported. The sound of chipping rock from incoming rounds underscoring his words. Acknowledged, Rostova replied. She didn't try to go for the target. She went for the canyon wall opposite it. It was a slab of sheer, rust-colored granite. She designated a point on the rock face with her laser. A suicidal maneuver by the book. Firing a weapon at a flat surface from this angle was inviting it to ricochet unpredictably, or worse, back at you. But Rostova wasn't following the book. She had calculated the angle, the velocity, the composition of the rock. She saw the shot in her mind before she took it. A bank shot, a ricochet, a one-in-a-million piece of aerial geometry. She squeezed the trigger. A single rocket hissed from its pod, a streak of white smoke against the dark rock. It struck the canyon wall precisely where she had aimed. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, the 275-inch rocket, its trajectory altered by the impact, careened across the canyon and slammed directly into the machine gun emplacement's aperture. The explosion was a dull crump, followed by a secondary blast as the nest's ammunition cooked off. A cloud of black smoke and pulverized rock belched from under the overhang. Silence. The relentless chattering of the machine gun was gone. On the ground, Hunter 3 Actual peered over his cover. The nest was obliterated. Shit! He breathed into his comms. Command shack. Valkyrie got a shack on the nest. I don't know how, but it's gone. In the TOC, the room was silent. They had the drone feed now, a grainy image looking down into the canyon. They had seen the rocket's impossible path. Vance stared, his skepticism warring with the undeniable truth on his screen. Valkyrie. The SEAL's voice came again, laced with a new, raw respect. Hunter 3 thanks you. You just bought us some time. Rostova didn't reply. She was already focused on the next problem. The dogleg turned just ahead, and the new threat signatures that were lighting up her display. The enemy now knew exactly where she was, and they were adapting. The canyon narrowed further, the walls closing in like a tightening fist. The brief victory over the machine gun nest was short-lived. The enemy, now fully aware of the lone fighter in their midst, responded with a furious, coordinated desperation. Men with shoulder-fired RPGs appeared on ledges above, their erratic rockets trailing smoke as they streaked toward her. Rostova treated them like insects, jinking and rolling with sharp, precise movements, the explosions blossoming harmlessly in her wake. The Hornet moved as if it were an extension of her own nervous system, anticipating her commands before she fully formed them. Then, a new tone, shrill and insistent, filled her ears. A missile launch warning. Valkyrie, you have a new threat. The voice of the TOC controller crackled, stating the obvious. We're tracking a mobile SAM launcher. It just came online. Bearing 090 from your position, other side of the ridge. They had been waiting for her. They had drawn her in. Colonel Vance watched the display, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the console. This was it. This was the trap he had foreseen. A fighter jet in a canyon was a fish in a barrel, and the enemy had just shown up with a shotgun. A heat-seeking missile in this confined space was a death sentence. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Valkyrie, recommend you abort, Vance said, his voice tight. Egress immediately. Negative, command. Rostova's voice came back, as cool and unyielding as the rock around her. Hunter 3 is not secure. She knew the missile was coming. She couldn't see it, but she could feel its presence in the electronic ether. Her threat warning receiver screamed. She didn't have the altitude to dive or the space to outturn it. Her only option was to break its lock. She slammed the throttle to full afterburner. Twin plumes of blue flame erupted from the engines, and the Hornet surged forward with breathtaking acceleration. She was flying directly toward the dogleg turn, a blind, 90-degree bend in the canyon that was universally considered non-navigable at combat speeds. What is she doing? The young lieutenant murmured, his eyes wide. Vance didn't answer. He was watching Rostova's energy state, her velocity, her altitude. The numbers didn't make sense. She was accelerating into the dead end. Just as the missile was about to achieve a terminal lock, Rostova punched out a thick cloud of flares, brilliant magnesium blooms that momentarily blinded the drone's IR camera. Simultaneously, she rolled the Hornet 90 degrees, knife edge, its wings perpendicular to the canyon floor. She was flying sideways, a hair's breadth from the stone walls. The heat-seeking missile, confused by the flares and the sudden shift in her heat signature, shot past her, unable to make the turn. It slammed into the canyon wall a half-mile behind her with a flash of white light that was visible even on the grainy feed. Rostova was now hurtling toward the dogleg turn at over 600 knots. There wasn't enough space to execute a conventional turn. She was out of options. Except for one. Command, trust Valkyrie, came the voice of Hunter 3 Actual. He was watching from his alcove, a spectator to this impossible ballet of speed and stone. In the TOC, Vance found himself holding his breath. He had given an order, and it had been defied. But the defiance was born of a competence he couldn't fathom. His rigid, procedural world was being dismantled piece by piece by the emerald green icon on his screen. He gave a curt nod to the comms officer. Let her work. The words felt foreign in his own mouth. He was ceding control, trusting the instincts of the pilot he had written off an hour ago. The dogleg turn rushed toward her, an unforgiving right angle of solid rock. To the systems in the cockpit, to the tactical displays in the TOC, to every known law of aviation, what she was about to attempt was suicide. A high-speed turn in this narrow space would exert G-forces that would rip the wings off the aircraft or drive the pilot into unconsciousness. Rostova saw it differently. She saw the airflow, the way the wind would curl around the corner, creating a pocket of turbulence and a slight updraft. She had mapped it in her mind, visualized it from the satellite data. Instead of banking, she pulled back hard on the stick, pitching the Hornet's nose straight up. The aircraft, still on its knife edge, responded with a gut-wrenching shudder. It was a maneuver from the fringes of aerobatics, a high-G rudder reversal, something a pilot might practice once at 30,000 feet with an ocean of empty air for a margin of error. She was doing it at 300 feet, boxed in by granite. The G-forces hit like a physical blow, driving her down into her seat, squeezing the air from her lungs. Her vision tunneled, the gray shroud of GLOC creeping in at the edges. Her G-suit inflated, pressing hard against her legs and torso, a desperate effort to keep blood in her brain. For a split second, the aircraft was flying perpendicular to its direction of travel, skidding through the air like a stone skipping on water. The Hornet's nose whipped around the corner. For a breathtaking moment, her canopy was filled with nothing but the granite face of the turn. So close she could see the individual cracks in the stone. Then, with a precise kick of the rudder and a forward push of the stick, she snapped the wings level. She was through. The maneuver had taken less than 2 seconds. In the TOC, the friendly icon vanished from the screen as it went behind the ridge, and for 3 eternal heartbeats, there was only static. Then it reappeared on the other side of the dogleg, perfectly stable. A collective, unconscious gasp went through the room. Vance felt a cold knot in his stomach unclench. He had just witnessed something that shouldn't be possible. Her new position gave her a clear view of the extraction zone, a slightly wider basin where the SEAL team's rescue helicopter, Pathfinder, was supposed to land, and in the center of that basin sat the reason the SAM launcher had been activated. It was a T-72 tank, its hull partially dug in, its main gun pointed directly at the LZ. It was the anchor of the enemy's defense, the final gatekeeper. Valkyrie Hunter 3. We have an armored threat dominating the LZ. Pathfinder cannot set down. Copy, Rostova said, her breathing only slightly faster than before. I have the solution. She nosed the Hornet over, entering a steep, terminal dive. This was the move she had been saving her dams for. She was diving straight between the cliffs, a vertical descent into the basin. The tank crew, confident in the air denial provided by the SAM launcher, was exposed. Her laser designator painted the tank's turret. The targeting diamond on her HUD locked on. The world outside became a blur of streaking rock. The altimeter unwound frantically. A calm, female voice in her headset announced, "Pickle, pickle." She released the bomb. A single GBU-54 fell away from the aircraft. She didn't wait to see it hit. She pulled back on the stick with all her strength, the afterburners roaring as she fought to pull the Hornet out of its death dive. The aircraft shuddered, protesting the insane G-load. The canyon floor rushed up to meet her. For a moment it seemed she had waited too long. But then, the nose came up, and she leveled out, her fuselage mere feet above the rock-strewn ground. Behind her, the 500-pound bomb struck the T-72's turret with flawless precision. The resulting explosion was catastrophic, a brilliant orange fireball that vaporized the tank and sent a shockwave echoing up the canyon. The fireball from the destroyed tank billowed upwards, a greasy black column against the red rock. The immediate, overwhelming threat was gone, but the basin was still hot. Enemy fighters, enraged and desperate, poured fire down from the ridges, their muzzle flashes like angry fireflies in the gloom. The extraction helicopter, Pathfinder, was on its final approach, but it was flying into a hailstorm. Valkyrie, Pathfinder is 5 mics out. The Hello pilot's tense voice reported. LZ is still spicy. I'll sanitize it, Rostova replied. Her voice was pure steel. She had done her primary job. The mission profile called for her to egress to leave the high-threat environment. But the blinking red icon of Hunter 3 was still blinking, and the green icon of Pathfinder was a fragile new variable in the equation. Her mission wasn't over. She threw the Hornet into a tight, circling bank at the edge of the basin, becoming a lethal guardian angel. She was a shark in a fishbowl, turning the canyon's confines from a prison into her personal arena. The enemy had expected a single pass, a hit and run. They were not prepared for a sustained, close-quarters knife fight with a Super Hornet. Another missile launch warning screamed in her headset, an RPG, or perhaps another shoulder-fired manpads. She didn't even look for it. Her thumb jabbed the countermeasure button, sending a cascade of shimmering flares into the air behind her. She watched the missile's smoke trail veer off and detonate harmlessly against the far cliff. Her eyes swept the ridges, her helmet-mounted display slaving her targeting pod to her gaze. She saw a flicker of movement, a heavy machine gun team setting up a new position overlooking the LZ. Before they could fire a single round, she rolled in. She didn't waste a bomb or a rocket. The guttural roar of the 20mm Vulcan cannon filled the cockpit, a sound that was more felt than heard. A stream of high-explosive incendiary rounds, a physical line of destruction, reached out and erased the enemy position from the mountainside. Pathfinder descended into the basin, its rotors whipping up a storm of dust and debris. The SEAL, Hunter 3 Actual, broke cover and sprinted for the helicopter, laying down suppressing fire as he ran. Rostova saw tracers arc towards the vulnerable aircraft. She responded instantly, dropping her jet's nose and strafing the ridge line, not aiming at a specific target, but walking her cannon fire along the crest. It was an act of violent suppression, forcing the enemy fighters to keep their heads down, to choose survival over aggression. The rock face exploded in a shower of sparks and stone chips under the onslaught. "He's on board," the Pathfinder pilot yelled over the comms. "We've got him. Going vertical." The helicopter lifted off, heavy and slow, its fuselage pockmarked with fresh bullet holes. It was at its most vulnerable. Rostova made one final pass, a low, screaming flyby that was pure intimidation. She flew between the helicopter and the enemy positions, deliberately drawing their fire, making her $90 million fighter the most attractive target. Bullets sparked off her armored fuselage. Warnings flared across her console. She ignored them all. Her focus was on the green icon of the helicopter, slowly gaining altitude, inching its way toward the safety of the canyon rim. "Pathfinder is clear of the hot zone," the pilot reported, his voice thick with relief. "Valkyrie, I don't know what to say. You're a damn legend." Rostova watched the helicopter disappear over the ridge. Only then did she bank her Hornet and follow, climbing out of the rocky chasm and into the open, gray sky. The silence of altitude felt profound. Back in the TOC, no one spoke. The room, which had been a cacophony of tense voices and chirping alerts, was now utterly still. On the main screen, the drone feed showed the empty basin, littered with the smoking wrecks of enemy positions and the blackened husk of the T-72. The red icon for Hunter 3 was gone, replaced by the steady green of Pathfinder, moving away from the Zagermar Massif at a safe and steady clip. Colonel Vance stood frozen, his hands resting on the console. He had watched the entire engagement, seen every impossible maneuver, heard every clipped, professional transmission. He had witnessed a pilot single-handedly dismantle a prepared ambush in an environment he had, with complete certainty, declared unsurvivable. His logic, his experience, his carefully constructed rules of engagement, all of it had been rendered meaningless. He had been wrong, categorically, fundamentally, and spectacularly wrong. The young lieutenant beside him let out a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding for the last 10 minutes. "Holy shit!" he whispered, to no one in particular. It was the most eloquent summary possible. A new voice patched through the comms, clear and steady now that it was out of the mountains. It was Hunter 3 Actual, speaking from the back of the helicopter. Command, this is Hunter 3 Actual. Package is secure. Heading back to base, there was a pause. And get a call sign for me. Valkyrie 207. The pilot is Major Eva Rostova. I want to know who to thank when we land. Vance didn't look away from the screen. His mind was replaying the bankshot rocket, the knife-edge turn, the final, brutal dive on the tank. It wasn't reckless flying. It was a form of genius he couldn't comprehend, an instinctive, visceral understanding of physics and violence that no manual could ever teach. It was the kind of skill that turned suicide missions into legends. He keyed his own microphone. His voice was quiet, measured. Solid copy, Hunter 3. Glad to have you back. He looked over at his aide. Get me Major Rostova's file. The aide blinked. Sir? You heard me, Vance said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Her entire service record. Flight hours, mission reports, commendations. Everything. Put it on my desk. And update her current status to reflect exemplary performance under extreme combat conditions. The order hung in the air. It was more than a commendation. It was an admission. It was the sound of a rigid, by-the-book institution being forced to recognize a power that operated beyond its margins. The respect in the room was a tangible thing, a silent acknowledgement of the woman who had just flown into a coffin and turned it into a throne. Vance turned away from the screen, his face unreadable, and walked back to his private office, the name Valkyrie echoing in the sudden quiet. Hours later, the sun was a searing white disk in a bleached-out sky. The heat rising from the tarmac of the airbase was a visible shimmer. F divided by a -18E Super Hornet, tail number 207, sat at the end of the flight line, isolated from the others. The ground crew had already refueled and rearmed it, but it still radiated a palpable aura of exhaustion. Heat haze ghosted from its engine nacelles, and the faint, acrid smell of burnt cordite and spent rocket fuel hung in the air around it. Major Eva Rostova was finishing her post-flight inspection. She moved with the same deliberate, economical grace she displayed in the air. She ran a bare hand over the patched-up scar on the intake, her touch lingering for a moment. Then she moved to the port wing, where a series of fresh pockmarks marred the gray paint, souvenirs from her final pass over the LZ. She traced the edge of a gouge with her index finger, her expression unreadable. To her, these were not damages to be repaired, but dialogues to be understood. The jet had spoken and she had listened. She heard footsteps on the concrete behind her and turned. Colonel Vance stood there, his uniform immaculate despite the oppressive heat. He had come alone. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze moving from Rostova to the battered fighter jet and back again. The silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of the cooling engines and the distant whine of another aircraft taking off. Vance had read her file. He'd seen the string of stellar performance reviews, always paired with quiet notes about her disregard for standard procedure, her tendency to operate on instinct. He had seen the list of missions, each one more improbable than the last. He had been judging a warrior by the metrics of a bureaucrat. Major, he said finally. The word was not a greeting, but an acknowledgement. Rostova met his gaze. She didn't salute. She simply stood, waiting. Her flight suit was stained with sweat, and there was a smudge of grease on her cheek. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear, alert, and impossibly calm. The mission report will state, Vance began, then stopped. He had prepared a speech, a formal commendation. But the words felt hollow, inadequate. In the shadow of the machine that had just defied death, formal words were an insult. He started again. What you did today, Major Rostova. The book says it was impossible. Rostova's gaze shifted to her Hornet. Her hand rested on its wing, a gesture of quiet communion. The book didn't fly the mission, Colonel. Her voice was low, matter-of-fact. It held no defiance, no arrogance. It was simply a statement of fact. Vance looked at the jet, at the scars new and old, at the woman whose will was an integral component of the machine. He finally understood. Respect wasn't earned in a briefing room with data points and probabilities. It was earned out there, in the narrow spaces between rock and sky, where instinct was worth more than procedure. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was more than a gesture. It was a concession, a transfer of authority from the institution to the individual. It was respect. Rostova nodded back, a mirror of his own gesture. Without another word, Colonel Vance turned and walked away, leaving the pilot alone with her aircraft. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Eva Rostova remained where she was, her hand on the cooling skin of her Hornet, a silent warrior and her metal Valkyrie, sharing a quiet moment of victory in the fading light.